All right, finally, it's part 5, the final part. Oh, wow, this has been, it's been a thing. Especially the 1 + 1 = 1 stuff that I finished the last video on. That knocked a lot out of me. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat here, after 1 + 1 = 1, it's not gonna get worse. But on the other hand, it's also not gonna get much better. Because now we're moving on to another chapter challenging a basic aspect of arithmetic: division. And I don't mean questioning a few details, I mean questioning the entire concept.
In math, we have the basic functions of arithmetic: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. That's what we all learn, and they are supposed to mirror our observation and experience. But we often forget to check what's really happening. Many whom I've asked, who are scientifically minded people, can't even explain to me how the most basic functions actually function in the real world. Let me explain.
I'd rather you didn't, but it's gonna happen anyway, so let's get through it.
Addition is observational. I can see putting 2 apples together makes 2. 1 + 1 = 2, in this case. Subtraction is observation. I can see that removing one of the apples leaves me with 1. 2 - 1 = 1.
I don't know, man. What if I blend the apple into applesauce? That's 1 apple minus 1 apple equals 1 applesauce. Or what if I pass a kidney stone? Me minus a kidney stone equals me and a kidney stone. That's 1 - 1 = 2. I'm not so sure about this subtraction stuff. Oh my god, I just realized I'm saying that in a jokey voice, but that's probably what Shmuel would actually say. In fact, he'd probably say, yeah, now you're getting it.
Multiplication is observational. I can see that if I double the number of apples starting with 2, I wind up with 4. 2 × 2 = 4. But here's the problem. How is division observational? What does division even mean? If someone can explain it, please tell me, because it doesn't seem to me to mirror reality at all.
Sure, Shmuel. I'd be glad to do that for no reason and no benefit whatsoever. But before I do, how about you take a shot?
If I have one piece of an apple, and I divide it in half with a knife once, it seems to me that should be 1 / 1. I had one piece, I divided it once. But what am I left with? 2 pieces, right? So the formula is 1 / 1 = 2.
Oh, okay. Don't they teach this in, like, grade 2? You know, to 7 or 8-year-olds? I mean, look, I know we just had a chapter about how 1 + 1 = 2 is fake, but that really wasn't about the basics of, like, adding 1 and 1 as abstract numbers. It was because of some stupid word game you made up. But I think maybe you kinda at least would grasp the concept of adding 1 and 1 if you weren't, like, merging clay balls together. I think you at least sort of dimly understand what addition is in concept. But here, you actually don't know what division even is, do you? When you were being taught in school, nobody ever taught you what division is for, like what any of the stuff you're doing in it even means. You actually really lack a 2nd grade education. And somehow, despite this, you skated through school, and apparently law school, if the back cover is to be believed, without ever learning grade 2 math. How is that even possible? Like, how do you just do day-to-day tasks? Thinking about stuff lawyers would have to do. You would have to be able to do proration. If you're dealing with divorce law or lawsuits or anything like that, you're going to have to figure out if this person gets this percentage and that person gets that percentage, how much does each get? There are so many instances in every area of law where you're going to need to know how to divide numbers that I don't even understand how you do law, let alone get through law school, without even understanding the concept at all on the most basic fundamental level. Like, even outside of my YouTube channel, outside of any work I've ever done, I use division all the time, just in regular daily life. You know, you talked earlier in the 1 + 1 = 1 section about how you wanted people to learn how to balance checkbooks and stuff, and do their taxes. How do you do that stuff? How do you do basic house maintenance? Like, say you have a board, it's 21 3/4 inches long. You want to cut it in half. Where do you cut it? What would you say? I don't know, it's just unknowable. Impossible. Shmuel, please tell me that you're not attempting any of this kind of stuff yourself. Not when you have, at most, grade 1 math skills. And I mean, obviously that's questionable too, because you don't know 1 + 1 = 2. Oh, wow. But, you know, I'll give you grade 1, why not? You know, this isn't like not knowing how to divide without a calculator. It's not knowing how to do long division or something. This is a complete failure to grasp anything about the idea. Other than that, you know, like you can use a slash to represent division and an equal sign in there somewhere, and that's about it. You don't know what those things mean, you just know that they're there. And yet you want to sit there and tell the rest of us who understand the concept that all of math is stupid and we should stop using it or change the way we do it. I don't see any way you could possibly be less worth taking seriously on this issue. But all right, Lil Shmuely, let's teach you some baby math. By the way, my 7-year-old daughter said to tell you this is baby stuff. Here are 6 toonies. Count along with me, Lil Shmuely. 1 plus 1 is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now here, let me put 3 of them in this little box. That's 3 toonies plus 1 box equals 1 box of toonies. 3 plus 1 equals 1. That's how math works for morons. Forget the box, throw it at the wall, call it names. Bitch. Now, we have 6 toonies in one group. Now, let's make 2 groups of the same size. 6 toonies divided into 2 equal groups. How many toonies are in each group? Count with me again. It's fun. 1, 2, 3. 6 divided by 2 equals 3. Now, we believe in regular vanilla God, not the false math God, so this number isn't fixed. It's constantly changing and could really be anything. That's what we'll tell the IRS when they audit us. Or whatever the Canadian version is, nobody really knows.
But that's not what math says. Math says 1 divided by 1 equals 1. What in the world has happened here?
1 toonie divided into 1 group of toonies is 1 toonie per group. No, that's not possible. What in the world has happened here?
Why doesn't a simple cutting of an apple or a pizza work out with math?
Worked out just fine for me whenever I did it. It'd probably work out for you too if you paid attention in grade 2, or any other grade before or after that. But you didn't because, of course, your entire life you've been fucking lazy!
I honestly don't know. I have not gotten a clear answer as to what division even is meant to represent.
Well, gee, let's see. I found this game called Doggy Division Dinners. Let's try that, Lil Shmuely. Okay, puppy food. 9 divided by 3 equals... Okay, go a little slower. I'm having trouble. Okay. Let's see. We have 3 puppies, so each one needs 9. 9? 9 in each one. Let's see. 8, 9. Okay, that should work. They're all sad. But this guy has 9 bones. Why is he sad? Come on, doggies, eat. Eat, doggies. Okay, okay, hold on. What if you get 1? No, 9 divided by 3. Oh, what if I put 3 in each bowl? That could work. That could be fun. Oh, look, it turned into moist dog food. Now they're all happy. Why did the bone turn into moist dog food? Well done. They're still hungry. Shake, 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 shake. 20 divided by 4. These are big numbers. Oh, no. So we have 20 bones. I think I got the point across. That's enough. Haha, that sure was fun. Does it make sense now?
When I learned all this, I felt a bit robbed, and you should too. Math that only makes sense in theory, i.e. in the world of math, shouldn't be revered, it should be rejected.
I don't know, man. It seemed to work just fine with the toonies, and the pizza, and the apple, and the doggy bones. I use it in the real world basically every day to perfect effect. I used it when I was a programmer all the fucking time, and it gave me the expected answer every damn time. Do you think division's not being used all the goddamn time in the software you're using to make these videos complaining that division doesn't work? You know, Shmuel, maybe it's not the concept that should be rejected, but your conception of it. Or maybe what should be rejected is whoever the hell failed you this badly. Because they clearly hated you. Nobody would do this to a child they didn't hate.
I never thought I would think of math as highly unscientific, but unfortunately, upon examination, that's exactly what it often is. We have come full circle. The world is now officially upside down.
Upon examination. That is hilarious. You didn't examine a damn thing, Shmuel, and you know it. It's not even that you don't know anything about what we're talking about right now. You don't even know what we're talking about right now. You don't know what division is, or addition, or anything else in math.
If the only people who can challenge the accepted wisdom are the people who excelled in the accepted wisdom the most, you're not going to have very many challengers. Better challenges might come from those who have actually studied the least. That may be another mind flip for you, but think about it. They, the uninitiated, have an open mind. No preconceived notions, nothing on the line.
And no idea what there even is to challenge. Shmuel, you don't know what division is. You're not incapable of doing it. You don't know what it even is that you would do. You've written an entire chapter in a book with your name on it, challenging an idea that you can't even begin to describe accurately. And yet somehow you think you're an expert who should be taken seriously on the subject of division or math in general. Not in spite of your absolute failure to comprehend the basic concept, but because you didn't bother, is what you just said. I didn't bother to learn shit, so I should be taken more seriously, is what you basically just said. Those who've studied the least have an open mind. Do you? Because I was arguing with you to try to show you that 1 + 1 really is 2 for 20 fucking emails or something. Other people have done the same. And you still go off on angry rants about how, no, it's fucking 1 or whatever I want, god damn it. Math works how I want. Your mind doesn't seem very open, is what I'm trying to say. But no, people should pay attention to you because you didn't bother. Because of your intentional laziness and ignorance. Those are your credentials. That's what you think makes you better qualified and more worthy of consideration than anybody else. Now, I want to be as clear as possible here because I know what I just said is based on the kind of clear and obvious distinction that's going to sail right past Shmuel. I am not saying that you have less credibility because you have a different opinion. Your opinion is not what I'm referring to right now. What I'm saying is, you don't have an opinion on this subject at all. You think you do, but you don't. You can't, because you don't know what the subject even is. You don't know what there is to have an opinion about. And so your opinion is not an opinion on this subject. It's an opinion on some other subject you made up all on your own. So if you have no idea what the actual subject is, and therefore can't even begin to form an opinion on it, the most credibility you can possibly have in a discussion of the actual subject is none. And by the way, one more small comment on this. Do you seriously expect me to believe at this point that you have no preconceived notions? Nothing on the line? After all your ranting about how math and science are awful because they try to make the universe seem fixed and that goes against your religion? Everything you've said has been driven openly by your preconceived religious notions, and those also seem to be what's on the line for you. Now look, I would love to stop talking math with Shmuel, but we have one more chapter on the subject before we're done with it. And that chapter is about E = mc squared. Yeah, a guy who neither grasps nor wants to grasp first grade math or second grade math, trying to interpret an algebraic equation with multiplication and an exponent describing unintuitive relativistic physics based on derivations of electromagnetic wave equations. This'll go fine.
The genius of all geniuses, the great Albert Einstein, and his landmark formula, E = mc2.
We're off to a great start. So the uppercase C I can excuse. Changing the exponent to multiplication, however, not as much. But hey, at least it's a 2 and not like an apple or something. I really should give him the wins where I can.
The scientific community has actually had the audacity to call this the God equation, God forbid, as if you could possibly sum up God with a few numbers and symbols.
Maybe I'm just out of the loop here, but I've never heard anyone use that phrase in reference to E = mc squared. I even searched for the phrase, and what I found was a book by Michio Kaku called The God Equation, The Quest for a Theory of Everything, which is not about E = mc squared. It seems to be about grand unification and how Kaku thinks string theory might be it, it. So maybe I'm just missing something, but I don't see anyone referring to E equals mc squared this way, and certainly not the scientific community in general.
The first problem I have with this formula is that nobody can explain what it means. And I'm serious. I've searched honestly.
At this point, I'm sure the audience will forgive me for just saying I think that's a lie.
Google is at your fingertips. Search online for explanations of E equals mc2 if you don't believe me. Your head will spin with what you find. You will be left confused and dejected. This is not good.
What leaves me confused and dejected is why you assume I'll be left confused and dejected. Because I searched online, honestly, and found pretty good explanations on what this equation represents, what it's useful for, and why. I really would suggest that you figure out grade 2 math before you move on to trying to figure out E equals mc squared. At the very least, get to the point where you learn algebra and exponents. You know, most kids don't just jump off the diving board to learn how to swim. They tend to start in the shallow end with water wings.
How good of a development in science could this be if scientists themselves don't even understand it enough to give us a clear, unified explanation?
Dunno, but since that's not the case, it doesn't much matter. Your failure is nobody else's failure, Shmuel.
Why do I say that? Well, his explanation that splitting an atom unleashes nuclear power is a theory, not a scientific conclusion. It comes from his imagination, not the real world.
Okay, but the conclusion from using the theory is that it works like hell. That would imply that it's at least a pretty good theory. Maybe the theory itself doesn't come from the real world, because of course it doesn't. It's a description of the real world by humanity. It came from us, after studying the real world. And based on its results, it seems to describe that real world pretty well.
How do I know? Because no one has ever observed an atom splitting. In fact, no one has ever observed an atom, period.
Atoms! 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of them!
It's too small to be seen, even with our best microscopes.
Funny you should say that. I was watching a bit more of Alpha Phoenix's channel after my response to you in the Speed of Light chapter, and he has a video of using a scanning transmission electron microscope to look at individual atoms. It's a really cool video, you should check it out.
Energy equals mass times speed of light squared.
Does it? But you keep saying energy equals mass times speed of light times 2. Which is it? Do you even know there's a difference?
Take a child who has never heard of Einstein's formula but knows multiplication.
Just multiplication or division too? Hey, maybe you can ask this kid what division means.
Take a child who has never heard of Einstein's formula but knows multiplication. See if he can see something off with this formula. He should. Do you see it? Really look and think back to basic math. I hope you figured it out.
When you say basic math, do you mean the kind of basic math where squaring is the same as multiplying by 2 and division means nothing and 1 sperm plus 1 egg equals 1 zygote? Or do you mean actual basic math? It's very important to specify if we're using mathematics or mathematesk.
This formula, you'll notice, cannot actually be done. And the reason is because you cannot multiply 2 different units. You can't multiply 2 different types of things. It is not sound. It's nonsense.
What? Why? Okay, we have 10 people, and they're each 200 pounds. That's 10 times 200 equals 2,000 pounds. Okay, we'll be fine in this elevator with a 3,000 pound capacity. I don't know, man, seems to work perfectly fine. You'd get the exact same result with addition, adding up these 10 people's weights one by one. But hey, for all I know, maybe that'd be 200 plus 200, 10 times, equals one group of people. 200 times 10 equals 1. It's funny that you have this objection to multiplying different units, which makes perfect sense because you're dealing with 2 dimensions, in the case of one thing multiplied by another. But you were perfectly fine adding things of totally different units before. 1 sperm plus 1 egg, 1 soup plus 20 grains of salt. That's not a problem, because...
Because what is multiplication? It's replicating the thing you started with a certain number of times. 1 apples multiplied by 2 equals 2 apples. We double what we had and we get a result of 2. That works. But watch this. 2 apples multiplied by 2 oranges equals error! That's an error!
Is it? That's a mathematical error? Or does it just result in units you don't think are useful? See, I'd say the unit that we get from an apple times an orange is one orange apple, or maybe an apple orange. Is that unit relevant to your application? What does it actually mean? Is it a group of apples and oranges, or an apple and an orange blended together into some kind of a fruit mush? Who knows? That's up to you to figure out. You're the one trying to use it for a real-world application. You gotta figure out how it matches up to your application. Math is extremely abstract. All that matters in math is the numbers work out. And when you apply units to an equation, that the units balance across the equal sign. Of course, even if you don't do that, the math will still work. It just won't give you a result that's meaningful to you. 2 miles times 2 pounds equals 4 apples is perfectly valid math. The actual math part of that is just 2 times 2 equals 4. The rest is all your language. It just means nothing to the physical world because you put stupid units on it that make no sense. So yeah, you gotta be careful screwing up your units across the equals sign, but on the same side of the equals sign, there's no problem. This is why you found it perfectly sensible to multiply 1 apple times the abstract number 2 that has no unit at all. Because units aren't really a part of the math. They don't matter, they're not relevant. They're just you giving whatever concrete meaning you want to abstract numbers that really couldn't care less. Now, of course, I agree that 2 apples times 2 oranges equals 4 apple oranges doesn't have much real-world application, but it makes perfect mathematical sense because the actual math is just abstract number 2 times abstract number 2 equals abstract number 4. The reason the combination you chose in particular doesn't mean much when applied to the real world is because these are not physical quantities you're multiplying, they're just 2 objects. You intentionally chose an example that gives a silly result, and then tried to generalize that to mean that every example of mixed units gives silly results. You can mix random words together in nonsensical ways all you want. You can do that in English too. To eat times 2 boogers equals 4 eat boogers. Well, I guess we better toss velocity times time equals distance in the garbage then. We'll see how much better this works when you do use physical quantities in a bit, when we really bite into E equals mc squared. But before we get into E equals mc squared and so on, let's change our units a little bit here so we can produce a more satisfying result. Instead of just saying we want to multiply 2 oranges by 2 apples, imagine that for each orange we have 2 apples. So instead of multiplying apples by oranges, we multiply apples per orange by oranges. Now the multiplication by oranges cancels out the division by oranges, and we're left with an answer in units you can easily grasp. 2 times 2 apples equals 4 apples, which I know you're fine with because you just said so. Do you notice how it gives a perfectly normal result no matter what words we choose to use? There are 2 pingles, and for each pingle there are 2 wubbies. There are 2 times 2 wubbies, 4 wubbies. But now let's do what you did in the last chapter and do 1 apple plus 1 orange. Apparently, for some reason, that's not an issue for you, so 1 apple plus 1 orange is, what, one of something that's both an apple and an orange? An apple orange?
You can't replicate the 2 apples 2 times and get something that's both an apple and an orange. It doesn't work that way.
So you don't understand multiplication conceptually at all either. That's another grade 2 topic, in fact, before division. You can't manage grade 2, you can't handle grade 1. What can you do? Let's see here. Just for laughs, let's look up Piaget's stages of cognitive development. Just tongue-in-cheek, okay? Let's see, formal operational stage, age 12. Begins to think abstractly and reason about hypothetical problems. Well, abstract thinking, I mean, you failed to understand that velocity relative to Earth and velocity relative to a plane share the same underlying principle. You completely failed to understand 1 plus 1 equals 2 as an abstract mathematical question separate from which concrete objects were chosen. Same thing with multiplication being an abstract operation where you can use any units you want. As for reasoning about hypotheticals, when I asked you in that email about what effect gravity would have on the meaning of up and down, your response was to tell me that you don't believe in gravity and so it was a stupid question. So that's not looking good. On the other hand, I gotta give it to you, you did bring up a hypothetical what if I'm wrong scenario with maggot spontaneous generation without parents, so that's a hopeful sign. Social stuff we haven't touched on too much, but philosophical issues, you did fail spectacularly on philosophy of science, specifically because you seem not to comprehend theoretical and abstract reasoning. Begins to use deductive logic, or reasoning from a general principle to specific information. Well, I mean, considering math is just a system of deductive logic, and considering how much trouble you have with it, I don't know, man. You don't seem to be a fan of deduction either way, judging by your occasional comments on it.
Watch out when you see that word, deduce. It means they have done no experiment, and we are no longer in the world of science. We are in the world of logic and the scientists' best guesses. Don't call it science, because none of us were there. It's a deduction. It's a prediction. It's not an observation.
Let's try the concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11. That might be easier. Begin to understand the concept of conservation, that the amount of liquid in a short wide cup is equal to that in a tall skinny glass, for example. Can you do that? Well, we've seen near the start that you have trouble with conservation as applied to the matter and energy in a wood fire, and later we'll see you have trouble with it applied to the growth and decay of trees. But I will grant that those scenarios are far more complex and far less obvious and far harder to demonstrate than pouring water from a wide glass into a skinny glass. So who knows, maybe you'd pass the water test. Possible. The rest of the stuff is all about logical thinking, and that's very questionable. For example, begin using inductive logic, or reasoning from specific information to a general principle. The first thing that makes me think of is your objection to hominid fossils as evidence of evolution. That you don't know if that individual fossil had kids, or if it's the ancestor of modern humans. Hell, you don't even know if it was ever alive at all! Completely missing the inductive reasoning behind the assertion that these fossils imply transition between ancestors of humans and modern humans, and the inductive reasoning that implies that it was probably alive at some point. It also makes me think of your objections to the reasoning behind ice ages, carbon dating, the age of trees we didn't see planted, anything at all that we didn't see directly or get told about by a talking dinosaur. What about the pre-operational stage, age 2 to 7? Begin to think symbolically and learn to use words and pictures to represent objects. I mean, the whole thing about the picture of the Earth created from data points went way over your head, and your objection with division was that you couldn't understand how it represents objects. Tend to be egocentric and struggle to see things from the perspective of others. Oh yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a worse case of that. But this doesn't just refer to attitude. Show a young kid a scene where character A puts a toy in box 1, then leaves the room, and then character B moves the toy to box 2, and then character A comes back in. And you ask the kid where character A will look for the toy. And at a certain age, that kid will say box 2, because that's where the toy is now. And the kid knows that, and can't understand that just because he or she knows the toy was moved, that doesn't mean the character, who never saw it move, also knows it. I remember having this conversation with my kid about why birds flew away whenever she tried to pet them, and I told her it's because they're scared. They don't know what you're gonna do. They don't know if you're nice or mean. And for years, her response was along the lines of, "But I don't want to hurt them," as if her intentions inside her head should somehow affect the bird's decision-making. And we'll see a very good example later on of how you also don't seem to grasp this separation of minds all that well. Getting better with language and thinking, but still tend to think in very concrete terms. Well, as I said, abstract thinking is definitely not your strong suit. You appear never to have considered why any aspect of math works the way it does. You don't grasp abstract concepts as basic as the meaning of division or addition. And the only way of obtaining knowledge about the world that you can appreciate, it seems, is pure brute observation through the senses, lacking any further analysis, deduction, induction, modeling, explanation, calculation, or anything else. Hence your insistence that the only good science involves things like observing that the ground feels hard and flat under your feet, and then just deciding the whole world has to be flat. Observing that the sun looks like it passes overhead, and so deciding that it has to go around the Earth. Seeing a video on YouTube where pi was measured to 3.4 with a string, and so assuming pi really was 3.4 for that circle, and so on. Let's try the sensory motor stage, birth to 2 years. Learn that things continue to exist even when they cannot be seen. Object permanence. Aha, well, I know you can do that because in the Flat Earth chapter, you said that when boats disappear over the horizon, they don't actually disappear, you just can't see them. And if you take a telescope, then they come back into view, which is not true, but at least you're as smart as a 1-year-old. I'll give you that. And somehow you have a law degree. Look, obviously all that was just a bit of fun, but even so, it's troubling how often Shmuel's thinking resembles the thinking of a child. I can only assume that was trained into him by someone, or possibly even by himself, wanting to align closer to what he thought God wants from him. He's gone so far down this path that through this whole book we've seen him make children into his intellectual role models and arbiters of truth. I don't know what his reasons are exactly or what's really going on in his head, and I think he's capable of better. He just doesn't want to be. It's weird.
You can only multiply numbers of the same units. By the same token, you cannot multiply mass and speed as suggested in E equals mc2.
E equals mc squared doesn't involve multiplying mass times speed. It involves multiplying mass by the square of speed, and that's critical. Mass times the speed of light times 2 would give you incoherent results. It would not give you units of energy. But mass times the speed of light squared does. But anyway, of course you can multiply mass and speed. It's called momentum.
It can't be done! I don't care if you go to the greatest physicist living today. He will not be able to multiply mass and energy, and you cannot, and your child cannot. Nobody can! Because math doesn't allow for it. Reality doesn't allow for it.
Math allows me and my child to multiply anything by anything. The numbers in math don't represent anything in particular, Shmuel. They're abstractions. Put whatever units you want on them. Yeah, if you have an equation, you gotta make sure that those units balance on both sides just the same way that the numbers do. But beyond that, you're fine. You're saying meaningless drivel about what multiplication requires you to do or requires you not to do because you haven't bothered to understand multiplication in the probably 30-something years you've been alive. Because you're fucking lazy! But of course, just like how E equals mc squared does not involve multiplying mass times speed, it also does not involve multiplying mass and energy. Obviously not, to anyone who understands what an equation is. The mass and the energy are on opposite sides of the equation. You might divide energy by mass by doing E over m equals c squared, but you're not multiplying energy times mass. You could if you wanted to. The units you would be working in are kilogram joules. That's the same as momentum squared. But that's not what we're doing here because we're dealing with E equals mc squared, not E times m equals something.
When pushed against the wall, I have had physics teachers.
You've had physics teachers? That's already hard to believe. How do you not know about momentum, then? That's pretty basic physics.
I have had physics teachers tell me it's like miles per hour, not miles multiplied by hour.
Your physics teachers told you that mass times energy, or mass times speed, or mass times speed squared is similar to miles per hour. Miles divided by hours. And multiple physics teachers told you this, did they? Okay, was one of these physics teachers the teacher who told you we fall to the ground because of Earth's magnetic field? Or maybe the one you told me about in an email who couldn't explain division to you but allegedly was no dummy, which I question strongly? By the way, distance times time is also a thing called absolute.
But don't let them tell you this, because that's not what the equation says. It's clearly a multiplication equation. Miles per hour is a possible thing.
A multiplication equation is just an equation. It's not this or that operation type of equation. Energy per mass equals c squared means the exact same thing, and that's a per equation, otherwise known as division, which you think is bullshit, and yet you accept miles per hour somehow.
Miles per hour is a possible thing. Still not possible in this equation, by the way.
Is it not? I mean, you could write c in miles per hour if you wanted to. That's valid, if kind of annoying. But again, how do you feel about energy per mass equals c squared? Because that's the same thing.
But miles multiplied by hours is impossible.
Impossible. Okay, Shmuel, say you have a spacecraft, and this spacecraft has a communication system which for some reason requires the signal strength to be constant when it's received at Earth. So to achieve that, the strength of the signal emitted by the spacecraft is going to have to be increased with more distance and decreased with less distance, which takes more or less energy depending on the distance. So let's say that the spacecraft uses 1 joule per hour per light year's distance from the Earth. I know, inverse square, but let's keep it real simple here. So if we have the spacecraft at 1 light year of distance and it stays there for 2 hours, that'd use 2 joules. If it's at 2 light years distance and it stays there for 1 hour, that'd still use 2 joules. We don't care in this case about whether the increased energy demand is due to more distance or more time. All we care about is understanding the energy needs, which is the product of both of those things together, distance and time. And that's the absolute, and we can see it works just fine. If we go to 18 light years for 5 hours, our absolute is 90. If we go to 5 light years for 18 hours, our absolute is 90. If we go to 15 light years for 6 hours, our absolute is 90. And since energy usage and absolute are in this case in a one-to-one relationship, we know in all those cases that we need 90 joules. That's right, audience, I'm a bit of a mathematician myself. So distance times time is entirely sensible, it has real-world applications, and you're telling me it's literally impossible to do that math.
So if this formula is useful, why can't we use it?
Who's we? You mean you.
Why does it not even make sense to the most basic student of arithmetic?
Because the most basic student of arithmetic is in preschool and has no idea what algebra, multiplication, or exponents even are, or that there's even anything there to understand.
When the speed of light, which is 1 unit, mph let's say, multiplies with mass, grams let's say, which is another unit, how do you wind up with energy? Kilowatt hours let's say, which is a third unit.
Alright, there's a question at least worth answering. Possibly even almost a good question. I say almost a good question because somehow you still think you're multiplying the speed of light times mass, which is not what the equation says unless you write it as E equals mc2, which you consistently do, because you don't know what exponents are. So enough laughing at your failure to grasp grade 2 math. I'm going to answer your question for you, specifically about E equals mc squared, so that you can ignore it and keep being stupid. And so I have something to do. So I know from our email conversation that you accept velocity equals distance over time, and I know that you don't accept velocity times time equals distance, because the latter, despite being identical to the former, is multiplying different units. And the fact that you don't grasp that those two equations, one with division and one with multiplication, are equivalent, means this E equals mc squared discussion is going to be entirely pointless. But fortunately, nobody cares what you think, so at this point I'm just going to ignore all the objections I know you'll have, and say things that make sense, and you can just go fuck yourself. So I'm going to explain the equation using sensible metric units, and then I'll switch and I'll show you how it still works out even with your weird mix of miles per hour and grams and kilowatt hours, which I can only assume you threw out there just to make it more confusing. Or because you had no idea it would, which might even be worse. Now, E equals mc squared, being a physical equation, is very similar to the velocity equation, except instead of distance, velocity, and time, it's about other physical quantities. E refers to energy, for which we're going to use joules. We could use some other unit of energy if we wanted, kilowatt hours in your case. 1 joule is the amount of energy defined by a force of 1 Newton moving an object 1 meter. If you wanted to, you could call it 1 Newton meter, but that's usually reserved for torque, and that's just to prevent confusion between torque and energy, but never mind. A joule is 1 Newton times 1 meter. 1 Newton is the amount of force needed to accelerate a 1 kilogram object by 1 meter per second per second. It's written like this. So 1 Newton times 1 meter is this, and that's 1 joule. We'll replace the division with multiplication just for convenience by changing the exponent. Meters squared over seconds squared becomes meters squared times seconds to the -2. It's exactly the same thing it was before, it's just written a bit differently. And I'm sure Shmuel is shrieking and clawing out his eyeballs, but he'll all cry more. And that's the unit for the left side of our equation, our unit of energy. And let's give it a quantity of hashtag, just to make it really annoying to look at and send little shivers up the math people's spines. Now, just the same way that distance is velocity times time, this is a single unit representing a single idea, but expressible as the product of other things. In this case, in plain English, it's the energy required for a 1 kilogram object to be moved 1 meter with a speed that increases by 1 meter per second in each second. That's what the unit we're using says, and to deny the possibility of even writing something like this is to deny pretty much the entire point behind why humans originally designed the language of math the way we did, which was to be useful for calculating about real-world scenarios just like this. Now let's do the other side of the equation, mc squared. I really have to reiterate, Shmuel, it's squared, not times 2. So we'll use a mass of 1 kilogram just for simplicity. Obviously c is the speed of light, which I know you think is just a big old load of hogwash in terms of whether it's really constant, but that's just not relevant here. It doesn't matter what we put there when we're explaining what the equation means and how we can multiply different units. For all I care, you can replace it with 10 meters per second. As a matter of fact, let's do that because it's just easier to look at. And now let's get rid of the division again for simplicity, and now we'll blorp the square into the speed of light bit. Ba-ba-ba-da-ba-da-boo, So as I'm sure you can't see, Shmuel, both sides are actually using the exact same unit. Units of energy. The fact that equations in physics need to have comparable units on both sides of the equation is called dimensional homogeneity. Aside from the fact that that's implied by the idea of equations being equal on both sides, this also goes back to a similar observation to Aristotle's that we saw before, about only the commensurable properties of objects being comparable. The pointiness of a pen, the flavor of a wine, and the pitch of a musical note can't be compared, they can't be considered equal, because they're not referring to the same thing. That's why saying 1 yard equals 3 feet makes sense, but saying 1 yard equals 10 pounds doesn't. Yards and feet measure the same dimension, distance, but pounds measure a different dimension, which is weight. Yards and feet are commensurable properties. Yards and pounds are not, and so this can be used as a sanity check on physical equations. Obviously, just because an equation balances on both sides with the units doesn't show that it applies to the real world, but that's not our issue right now. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even going to bother with that in this video because it's just not worth it for a video where the basic issue is fucking multiplication. How does it work? What dimensional homogeneity does is show that the equation at least makes sense as an equation. That is, the two sides can be equated. It's an apples-to-apples comparison. Your objection to just multiplying different units made no sense, and if you'd not been fucking lazy and plugged some real-world values into some physics equations, you would have figured that out really, really fast. But this here is a similar problem, and this is a serious apples and oranges objection that you could have raised. A real, actual problem of the equation comparing things that are not comparable. If the two sides really did not have dimensional homogeneity, if mass times the speed of light squared really did not return units of energy, that would be bad. Bad. Toss it in the garbage bad. But as I've just shown you, the units of both sides do match, and so that's not relevant. And you'll complain that this makes no sense, and I'm a shill for big math, and I hate God or whatever, and nobody cares, because you don't even understand the words I'm saying. Alright, now really quickly, let's run through it with your units. It's kind of funny, by the way, that you mentioned kilowatt hours, since because that's a unit of energy, it's fundamentally based on multiplying different units, which you claim is impossible. And beyond that, it's even right there in the name. Kilowatts times hours. Kilowatt hours. Anyway, to keep things consistent, I'd really recommend converting everything first to the units I used before. That is, meters per second and kilograms and joules. Because otherwise, the math is going to become a complete nightmare really, really fast. So take your miles per hour, and it'll be about this. Multiply it by this to convert it to meters. Divide by 3600 to convert hours to seconds. And you should end up with 299,792,458 with a couple of thousandths in change because I rounded the original miles per hour number to the first decimal place. And this is one really big reason why the math would get annoying if I tried to use your units the whole time. I wouldn't even really be able to achieve a properly equal equation. I'd have to use that about equals symbol, the little squiggly equals sign, because I'd be trying to mix units from different systems that don't play nice together. I don't know if you understood you were making such a horrible mishmash of units, but that's what you did. And we're going to have to deal with it at some point. It's much better if we just settle all that up front. So divide your grams by 1,000 to get kilograms, multiply your kilowatt hours by 3.6 million to get joules. And I should say, by the way, just in case you're again shrieking at your monitor, Shmuel, you could just not do this. You could just try to live with it. It would still be dimensionally homogeneous. It would still pass the test. What you'd end up with is a number in kilowatt hours on the left side, and on the right side, some obnoxious unit like grams times miles per hour squared, which I don't think anyone has a name for because it's stupid, but I think it needs one to contrast it against the lovely joule. Let's call it the Shmuel. But we'll leave the Shmuel to use and convert to joules instead. So if you want 1 kilowatt hour, then to figure out the equivalent mass, that'll be 3.6 million joules equals this. There, we solved for kilograms. Now plug this value back into E equals mc squared and see if you get roughly the original 3.6 megajoules back out, of course taking into account a little bit of imprecision from that little bit of rounding I did on the final number. I just realized I said of course despite knowing Shmuel has zero clue what I'm on about, and there's a 0% chance of him ever listening past the first 2 + 2 = 5 seconds of this math. I'm pretty sure I know exactly why he thinks nobody can explain how it works, which is that they can't, to him specifically, and I don't imagine many people bother to try either. To cap it off, I'll point out that if what Shmuel objects to is that pesky multiplication, we could have just written this with no multiplication at all. I already pointed out E over m equals c squared, but what about E equals m over 1 over c squared? Now it's a per question! So, back to it then. Shmuel rambles on about the speed of light not being constant and c changing outside of a vacuum, and how did Einstein know which c to pick and that it should be squared, and it's not worth it. He already got me to spend so much time addressing his objection about multiplying different units, and that was already pointless. I know that he understood none of it. Shmuel, go talk to your not-a-dummy physics teacher and learn about how 4 times 2 is 42 or something. The next chapter is Put God to the Test.
Personally, I don't believe in anything. Just God and his words. If it came down to it, I would trust him over my own observations as well.
Gee, I'm shocked. How could I have guessed?
Have there ever been observers of God? Throughout the generations, there have been millions upon millions of observers of God until this very day.
By observers, what do you mean exactly? People feeling like someone's there, having visions, looking around at the clouds and the trees, just believing really strongly? Stories like Mount Sinai that sound suspiciously like mythologized natural events? All of the above?
It will be hard for the atheists to deal with this in an honest debate. They make a claim that they saw something. They all saw the same thing. He now has the burden to prove that every single one of them is either lying or misinterpreting what they saw or are part of some massive conspiracy.
Alright, firstly, that's not a real scenario. When I talk to believers, it's pretty rare that they'll say they directly saw God or something. They'll talk about how they really feel like it's true. They just know it's true. They believe it because they can't explain nature otherwise. They take the Bible or the Quran's truth as axiomatic. Stuff like that. Occasionally, someone will say they had a really compelling dream or a vision based on the religion, and in my experience, even the ones who insist at first that they saw something definitively often back down once you start asking probing questions. Okay, yeah, it wasn't so much that I saw God, it was that I saw something that I couldn't explain. And it's not that that makes it God per se, it's just I felt this swell of joy and love, and I knew in my heart that God was there with me, stuff like that. So the way you present this doesn't seem to me to be something that happens that often in reality. But if there is some religion out there where all the followers really do claim to have literally seen the exact same event or vision, I'll have some very probing questions for them too, and I don't expect to get very many satisfactory answers. But I'm a long way from having to cross that bridge at this point. Either way though, if 1 million people want to convince me to join their religion, it's not my job to catalog all 1 million people and conduct 1 million detailed interviews and investigations and prove them all individually wrong. They want to convince me. It's their job to tell me their evidence, and it's my job to do whatever I want, really. I have no obligation to engage with anyone about anything if I don't want to. But if I'm gonna write a book trying to debunk them, I should probably at least put in some kind of effort to understand their claims and the evidence they've presented to avoid looking as foolish as you have this entire time. But aside from that, it's their burden to convince me they're right. It's not my burden to prove each of them wrong. Or do you think you have some obligation to individually debunk every single time in history any person ever successfully divided a number or multiplied different units? Really? Well, then you lose by your own rules because you haven't done it.
Can he do this? Can you prove these 1 million people are all wrong?
What an interesting standard. Since you're the one who came up with it, you must follow it, right? So can you prove that every single person by name who was ever involved in testing the speed of light didn't see the results they claim they saw? Can you prove definitively that each individual photo of the Earth from space is fake, one by one? Can you prove one by one that everyone who's ever used E equals MC squared for real-life applications actually didn't? For that matter, can you prove one by one, individually, that all of the supposed 3 million people at Sinai actually existed, and that they actually saw what they say they saw, not just that they say so? I'd like each of their names, please, as well as fingerprints and DNA.
No, you can't. You weren't there.
Yeah, well, unless you're somewhat older than you look, you were not at Sinai, and you weren't any of those other places I mentioned either. What's going to be your excuse for never following your own standards of evidence? Is it just that you're the good guy who believes in God and I'm the bad guy who doesn't, so it applies to me and not to you?
What evidence can you produce that there was foul play involved?
In the imaginary case of 1 million people seeing, and I quote, something How should I know, Shmuel? It's not real. There's nothing to indicate foul play. There's nothing to indicate any play at all. I'm not making a judgment as to the sort of play at play. The burden is on you to convince me there was play. You haven't done that. You just say that you believe it because the Bible says so and your grandpa says so. Well, I'm not inclined to believe either of those on blind faith. You go nuts, do what you want to do, but again, if you want to convince me, it's not going to work. Nor should it.
You can try, but here's the difficulty. What if just one is right? Just one was honest and had the right glasses on and really saw this thing? Well, sorry, that means God is real. It only takes one good witness, with nothing else to controvert him, and God wins the debate.
Seriously, what is it with you and winning debates? There's only one way to win a debate in reality. I know that people do these weird point systems and audience votes, and that's all bullshit. The one and only way to actually win a debate is if the person you're debating says, I agree with you now, I've changed my mind. If the person you were trying to convince was not convinced, you didn't win. You know, this is the example I mentioned before about Piaget's cognitive development stages, of not really understanding that people have separate minds from your own. Shmuel, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I cannot read an eyewitness's memories. And even if I could, I wouldn't know if those memories are accurate. Memory is not infallible. It's very far from it. But that's not relevant because I have no access to his mind, much less the actual event itself. If he actually did see the event, all right, but I can't know that. All I can do is decide if the evidence is good enough that I should find it more probable that he did witness that event than that he didn't. Let's say someone actually witnesses an event which, if it were true, would be definitive proof of God somehow, and his mind contains a perfectly accurate memory of it somehow. He knows for certain that it's true, somehow. And now let's say he tells me about it. Well, since he knows it's true and he told me about it, now I must know it's true, right? No. Just because he knows it doesn't mean I know it. I have no idea how good of a witness he is. How am I supposed to know if he's right? Well, the best I can do is listen to his story, try to understand the details, maybe find some corroborating evidence, or disconfirming evidence, either way, and then decide for myself if I think that what he says is more likely true than not. There you go, that's my option. So you ask this as a what if. What if I fully disprove 999,999 of the 1 million eyewitnesses, and I know they're all full of crap, but then I stopped, and that one guy I left out, he's the real deal? Well, I'd have to wonder why 1 million minus 1 people were all wrong about the same event he was right about, but that's beside the point. The point is, I don't know what the difficulty, as you put it, even is. Your argument goes like this. If there actually is one correct witness, then God is real. It's possible that there's one correct witness, and therefore, what, maybe God is real? Maybe there's a guy who actually saw a thing that proves there's a God, and so maybe there's a God. Okay, and? Is that what you want me to believe? That maybe you're right? Okay, whatever, maybe you're right. And maybe you're not right. Gee, how will I cope with this difficulty? I couldn't just believe this is a pointless hypothetical until you give me some reason to believe it's real outside your head. That'd be impossible or something. Okay, now we're back to how much better prophets are than scientists, and we've heard all this before.
If they make the prediction, and claim it was from God, and it doesn't come to pass, off with their head.
Yeah, but I've seen the lengths believers will go to when they really buy in to pretend a prophecy was fulfilled, either by twisting the often already vague prophecy to fit events, or twisting events to fit the prophecy. We saw this with you in the Code of Esther, and, well, with you and the Fall of Babylon.
If they claim they saw or heard from God and they claim to be a prophet, they risk their lives. The words of the accepted prophets can be seen in any Bible. Those who study the Bible well are aware of the prophecies that have come true even thousands of years after they were spoken.
Right, so if the people are willing to wait thousands of years for prophecies to come true, that means the death penalty is not much of a deterrent, doesn't it? Most, or dare I say all, prophets will be long dead after thousands of years.
I don't list them here. There are hundreds already documented. Just Google Old Testament prophecies fulfilled.
But Rabbi, when I do that, it comes back with a bunch of stuff that says Jesus is the Messiah because he fulfilled Old Testament prophecies. Did I Google wrong? Please advise.
Notice the tremendous detail they give. Notice the authority and lack of equivocation.
I have never seen a supposedly fulfilled Bible prophecy that met that description, except the ones where the story says it was predicted and then also says it happened at the same time, which isn't exactly impressive as a prophecy. On the other hand, I have seen many, many, many tremendously detailed, unequivocal, and unambiguously fulfilled predictions from science. Strange, isn't it?
Scientists are humble, covering their behinds. They constantly doubt themselves. Look at their articles. Maybe this and possibly that all day long. The prophets speak with no doubts and no equivocation.
Yeah, what a difference, eh? Despite scientists collectively having a level of predictive success that makes all Bible prophets put together look like a total joke, they don't start proclaiming themselves to be the voice of God, demanding obedience, dictating rules for life, declaring absolutely certain knowledge. For the most part, they keep regular-sized heads, they keep their language realistic and down to earth, and they just get on with it. Of course, the predictions are still unequivocal. If my theory's right, this must be observed, otherwise I'm wrong. That sort of thing. So next, we're on to Shmuel's favorite evidence for his religion, the apparently 3 million witnesses at Mount Sinai.
How do I know 3 million testified to this?
Because you were there and you personally interviewed every single one of them and investigated their cases in detail to establish one by one that there were 3 million people specifically and all of them saw this thing, because otherwise you lose the debate. I assume that's your standard, so that's gotta be the answer.
It's all in my family tree, and it's all well documented.
Another claim I'm perfectly happy to outright assert is false without even needing to see your evidence. Nobody on the planet has a genealogical record going back that far in history. That's just not a thing. You don't have this. You damn well know you don't have it. If you want to prove me wrong, do it. I expect I'll receive a few napkins covered in crayon. Regardless, if you somehow had a genealogical record that showed that you were descended from every single one of those 3 million witnesses, that doesn't prove that they witnessed anything. All you have, still, that shows that they witnessed anything is a line in a book. You don't have their testimony. You have something someone wrote about them. Even if your family tree could be established as legitimate and not just something somebody wrote down in modern times to try to link you back to those people, all that would do is show that there were 3 million people alive at the time. If it's a good enough record, maybe it would even establish that they lived in the area you want to show they lived in, which if you could establish that would at least help your case to some extent, because right now I don't even believe that part. But it would not demonstrate that the event someone else claims they saw happened, or that they saw it. It would be literally no evidence at all for that because it wouldn't even address that question. That's not what family trees do. But again, you don't have it. I know you don't have it, and so do you. If there's one thing in this book that stands out above all others to show that you're a fucking liar, this is it.
Any Jew who studies his genealogy will find, as little as 5 generations back, that his family believed in the revelation of God at Mount Sinai.
Wait, that's what you mean? Not that you have a well-documented family tree going back to 3 million Sinai witnesses, but that 5 generations ago your family believed the religious claims of Judaism. Shmuel, these are not the same claim. One is completely outlandish and unbelievable, and the other one is really, really obvious.
Many Jews can trace their lineage back to King David and the prophets, and all the way back to Moses and even Adam.
No, absolutely not. Again, you don't have this because this isn't real. Nobody has an authentic genealogy going back even remotely as far into the past as those events are claimed to be. Genealogy, as it's practiced today, is only a few hundred years old. And even if it were older as a practice, you do not have documents or any other evidence to support any claimed genealogy in the distant past, or even, I strongly suspect, in the relatively recent past of a few hundred years back. So this is a challenge to you, Shmuel. You can easily make a fool out of me because you have these documents, right? So if you're not lying, I should be putting myself at a major disadvantage here. I can't prove I'm right, but you can prove I'm wrong. So do it. Let's see what you got. I'm not going to hold my breath. Alright, now let's get past this boring Sinai stuff and get back to something fun.
Mass and matter are constantly created and destroyed. Constantly. When you walk through that meadow for years, you know this to be a scientific fact. The tree that started as a sapling has grown to 45 feet. What happened? Where did all that new mass come from?
Mostly CO2 in the air and water and some minerals from the ground.
That's right. It's brand new mass. It was created in front of your eyes. God, the creator, did that. It couldn't happen on its own.
And then Shmuel repeats roughly the same thing but reversed, saying that decay shows that matter is destroyed as well.
You have witnessed the creator in action. You now joined the 3 million, and you can testify to others.
Aha! I fooled you, audience! We weren't past the Sinai stuff at all! See, this is the kind of I've seen God, I've witnessed miracles type stuff I was referring to before, where it turns out that what they really mean is, I don't know what this photosynthesis thing is you godless freaks keep talking about, but I've seen a tree. And apparently that is enough to put you in the same league as the 3 million witnesses at Sinai, according to Shmuel, which if I'd somehow been impressed by that story before, that might finally convince me not to be.
Since science is wrong sometimes, science as a whole is false. The Bible is true and constantly and unabashedly professes to be true. A risky move. But it has paid off because it has never said anything that has been proven wrong. Not in its prophecies, not in anything. It's been proven right hundreds of times. If you don't believe it, Google it.
I googled it. You said it was never wrong, so I just searched for errors in Bible, and it came back with a bunch of lists of errors in the Bible. Why do you keep telling me to Google stuff? That Google thingy keeps coming back with stuff that says you're wrong, and apparently if it tells me so, I should believe it, according to you. Well, I've got nothing else to say up to page 241, and according to the table of contents, that's the last page of The Atheist's Guide to Faith in God and Freedom from False Science by Rabbi Shmuel Pollen. As I said before, beyond the table of contents, there's no indication at all that this weird book inside a book has actually ended, and we just keep going on with more chapters like nothing's changed. It's incredibly confusing that Shmuel thought this was the ideal approach. Most of the book from here on out is just drivel about how great Shmuel's religion is, and its rules, and how it can improve your life and the world, and blah, 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 blah. I am so far past caring about any of that right now. There are a couple highlights I'll touch on, though, and then I'll call it a day. On page 316, he starts talking about Satan.
He is our nemesis, the one who tricked our parents into eating poison and plunged all of mankind into 6,000 years in which no day doesn't have a human tragedy.
Which is very strange to hear after the chapter about how terrible events like the Holocaust are just God entertaining himself.
The one who came back as Hitler and exterminated 6 million of God's chosen people and many others. The one who gassed babies. Satan is pure evil.
That's even weirder, considering this quote from the Holocaust chapter, which I don't think I included in part 1.
So to answer our original question, where was God in the Holocaust? He was inside the gas chambers, gasping for air and climbing the walls. He was the Nazi who stabbed a Jewish baby to death with a bayonet. He was the train. He was everyone in the train. He was the starving Jews singing songs of redemption. He was all of it, inside and out.
So what room is there exactly for Satan? God was everyone involved. The victims, the victimizers, everyone. So God was the Nazis. God was Hitler. God is the one who gassed babies. God's the one who committed the genocide. And as we learned before, it was not for any noble goal or plan, but just to amuse himself, to play a game with himself.
He is the source of all evil. He wants to torture, and torture, especially the most innocent. God created him for a reason. The challenges he puts in front of us make us stronger, but Satan goes far beyond what God allows him. Criminally, far beyond. The rabbis say he will be punished for every last thing he did out of his jurisdiction in the end of days, and it won't be pretty.
So yeah, I fail to understand where the distinction even is between God and Satan. Satan is supposedly the source of all evil, except he was created on purpose by God specifically to do evil. And of course, since God is omniscient, God had perfect foreknowledge of every evil act Satan would commit before he ever even created him. If he wanted Satan to be different, he would have created him different. Satan doesn't go beyond what God allows him. That's not possible, because God created Satan exactly how God wanted him to be, knowing exactly what would happen, and really Satan doesn't have a choice in the matter. As Shmuel says, God created him for a reason. He created him knowing what he would do. Satan was created to do bad things to humans to create challenges for us. He has no choice. But okay, if we want to say that God isn't all-knowing, he made a mistake somehow. He did create Satan to do evil deeds, but Satan's evil deeds got out of hand. He did more evil deeds than what he was supposed to do. Well, God's still all-powerful, right? So he could just correct his mistake at any moment. At every moment, he chooses not to. As Shmuel said earlier, God is recreating all of reality at every moment. So at any moment, he could just recreate reality without this part of it. But he doesn't, because he created it that way for a reason. He wants it that way. If the director didn't want it that way, he would direct it differently. He wouldn't film little movies like the Holocaust to entertain himself, but he does. And apparently Satan was one of the actors in that show, specifically Hitler. But God was also Hitler, along with everyone else in the world. And so, what exactly is Satan? How is he distinct from God? Is he just some manifestation of the dark side of God's id? His thanatos, his instinct towards death and destruction? Because one thing's for sure, Satan doesn't seem to be acting against God's will. He certainly can't be doing anything God doesn't allow him to, because if God didn't allow it, he wouldn't be doing it. That's the point of God. It wouldn't be possible. God is supposed to be fundamental reality. You're telling me Satan's doing stuff that's not permitted by fundamental reality itself? He's doing stuff that the all-powerful, all-knowing entity has to just stand by and watch and go, "Yeah, stop it, I'm gonna punish you later." Please. And it doesn't really sound like he's acting separately from God in any meaningful sense. Maybe he's just kind of an aspect of God, something like the multiple aspects of God in the Trinity. It's hard to say, but this guy's theology is really, really weird.
He always comes, or the chosen people, because he is the exact opposite of God.
Except that, according to the Holocaust chapter, the one who came for the chosen people was God. Again, how are these entities even distinct from one another, let alone opposites? It seems to just be God doing stuff.
I know Satan used to be married to our mother Eve, and he talks. So I know he is in basically human form, but he is called a snake. So I know he has snake-like features. If you are a maven of UFO research, he is probably the father of all the reptilians.
Oh. I made a dumb joke what feels like a long time ago now when you said it was a high-level conspiracy that the meter was redefined in terms of the speed of light. And I said it was the reptoids, assuming you wouldn't actually think that. But now it looks possible you might actually think that. Well, on that note, I think I've said about all I care to say about this book. As you can see, I just had 1 or 2 observations, nothing major. Really though, if you've stuck with me all the way to the end, I'm impressed. I had no intention of making this review this long. I bought this book on a whim, thinking there'd probably be some fairly typical apologetics and, maybe a couple funny moments. Like we saw in Shmuel's videos, where it generally was pretty generic, but some of it was really, really off the wall. For example, I kind of expected the spontaneous generation thing. I did not expect what even is division anyway, or a denial that 1 and 1 is 2, or that God did the Holocaust for fun. I don't have some big rant to close this out like I had at the end of Almando's book. I've said everything that needs to be said in the videos themselves. To be honest, the book itself says everything that needs to be said. My head hurts and I want to go lie down. Before I go though, this series took far more work than this book deserved. So if you liked it, or if you like my other stuff, please do consider supporting the channel. And I want to give a huge thanks to all the people who already do that, who make it possible for me to keep putting out videos like this regularly. They get a few perks. They get access to videos usually way before anyone else. They get a collection of exclusive videos. At this point, there are about 65 of them. We have a monthly Discord call where Shmuel actually joined us to debate, which was a gigantic shit show because there were like 5 people trying to talk at the same time, but it was still funny. For somewhat early access, you can sign up to the email list at list.logicked.com. Thank you very much for sticking with me on this one, and I'll see you next time.